Okay, raise your hand if you need a pen. Okay, this doesn't work. Does anybody have an extra writing utensil? Wait. You need one too, Paige? Okay, Harper needs one. You have an extra one? Thank you. Here you go, Harper. What's up? We do. 22,000 listeners. Yeah. You can go back and listen to some of the old ones when I was. Those ones aren't good. They're not as good. All right, so raise your hand if you were here at the last class. Harper, you were here. Lily, you were here. Okay, did you guys meditate? That was not a convincing yes. What are we seeing? What are our reflections if we're actually doing them? Not getting bored as fast? That's pretty good. Why do you think we get bored less when we meditate more? Can you learn from every experience? When we're learning, are we bored? No, right? You're curious about something, okay? So when we're trying to escape a bored emotion, right, can that be learning and not boring in essence? Yes. So that's good. That means you're actually doing it. What else?
I noticed on the first day when you had to switch between walking and sitting, it was kind of weird, because your brain kind of started getting curious.
Okay. So did that help you keep momentum throughout your day?
Yeah.
It did? Okay, that's why I designed it that way. That's good. What else? Were you gone for July? That's why, okay. Again, are all these on YouTube if you missed days? Yes. I'll make today make as much sense as possible for the people that weren't here. Cool? But again, girls and guys, will anything really matter in these classes if you don't meditate? It's the whole point. Sound good, Paige? Cool? All right, we ready to have a good day today? Let's do it. So, write down class 9 in your notebook. Okay? Emotions and perception. Emotions and perception. Okay. So, let's go back to 3rd grade or whatever grade you learned what emotions are. What's an emotion?
Angry.
That is an example of an emotion. What is it? Right? It's whatever, it's the experience of feeling, right? It's a range of an experience of feeling. So let's write that down. Emotion is a range of an experience of feeling. Yes. Is a range of an experience of feeling. Okay? When we talk about emotions, girls and boys, the first problem is, do most people think that there are good and bad emotions? Yes, right? Do a lot of us label emotions as good or bad, or ones we want and don't want? Yes or no, Addie?
Yes.
Is this a problem?
No.
It is. Why?
Because they're all good.
It's a huge... Well, yeah, you have to take on that mindset, okay? None of them are bad, right? Because do all emotions belong?
Yes.
Because they're trying to do what? Is it trying to show you something?
Yeah.
Emotions are pointer fingers, right? They're not something you should hold on to or want to be different. It's pointing to something that you need to learn, right? So let's take a simple example. Let's say Lily doesn't get a lot of sleep the night before. And she starts to notice that when she doesn't get a lot of sleep, she seems to be in a little bit less of a good mood, right? Is that pointing to a possible solution or to whatever you're experiencing to be better? Yes. So write this down. There are no bad emotions. All emotions just want to belong. You still don't have a paper or pen. My bad, buddy. You cool if you use the Sharpie? Yeah. Everyone stole all my other writing utensils. And all emotions want to belong. It's trying to show you something. It's a pointer finger. You all on the same page? Okay. Because, girls and boys, when we label things as bad emotions or good emotions, does that cause more wanting? It does, right? Because if we're clinging to good emotions, I want to keep that. I don't want to lose it, right? Because a form of not wanting something is also what? Is that also a form of wanting? To not have something?
Yeah.
It is, right? So wanting, we learned, you weren't here for it, leads to attachment, correct? Do you remember that from one of our classes, girls and boys? Wanting leads to attachment. Maybe you weren't here for that one. When we have more attachments, we're less what? Gosh dang it. Remember when we had this diagram? This circle represents what's going on in the moment. This line represents what? Wanting. Do you remember this? Yes. And this circle represents what? Attachment, right? So let's say you have an attachment to not feeling sad, right? So every time you experience sadness, you want it to be different, you wish the moment were different. It's created this attachment of sadness. Does that make you less free? Yes or no? When you have an attachment to something, when you're holding on to something to be a certain way. It does. You tethered yourself to an emotion or a result, right? You need it to be that way to feel okay or to be the best person or player you can be. So do we want a lot of attachments? No. Why do you think most people have a lot of attachments? Because they label emotions as good or bad. So they hold on to good ones and they deny bad ones. We're on the same page? The second biggest problem with emotions, write this down, emotions distort perception. Emotions distort perception. What does it mean to distort something, Lily? So let's take an example of the photo booth. You girls and boys ever play with the photo booth on the Mac? You guys never played with that on the Mac? The photo booth? The thing that makes your goofy faces and stuff? Yeah, right? So listen, the filter of those goofy faces, Paige, the filter of those goofy faces, are they distorting the image of yourself? Yes, right? It's distorting what's real, so you can't see clearly. The goal of everything I'm trying to give you is to see what, Harper? Clearly. Because if you can see clearly, can you stop your problems mentally? Yes or no? You can, because you can see the cause. And then can you replicate things that you do want to strive for, or the person you want to be? Because you can actually see what's causing more of those states. Cool? So this whole class is going to be about, essentially, you have to be very, very careful when we're emotional because it's causing a lot of your problems by seeing things in the wrong way. Make sense? We're all on the same page? Okay. So, the first thing we're going to learn about, girls and boys, is pain and suffering. Okay? Have we heard of these terms before? Pain and suffering? What's the difference? Does anybody know? Pain and suffering. Bingo. You can partially control suffering, okay? Pain you can't control, right? Can pain both be a physical and mental experience? Yes, so don't think pain's just physical experience, right? Say you break your leg, that's a pain of what? Physical, right? Say you lose your pet, that's pain of what? Mental. Does that make sense? What is suffering then? Bingo. Gosh, you, other hand. You guys are so smart, okay? Dwelling on the pain or wishing it to be different or constantly ruminating on it, that's suffering, right? So we're in control of that suffering when we learn to let go and to stop ruminating or dwelling or wanting or wishing or thinking on what happened, the pain. Does that make sense? So that's why there's this two-arrow analogy, right? The first arrow that hits you obviously is going to be painful. That is pain. It's the initial experience. You can't control it. Suffering, right, is the second arrow that you put on yourself. You are the one that puts suffering on yourself. No one else is. Have you ever heard the phrase, always take responsibility? Essentially what that's meaning is taking responsibility of your suffering because no one else is giving it to you. You're the one that is putting it on top of the pain of the experience. Does that make sense? So this whole speech essentially is going to be about learning how to stop putting that second arrow on yourself emotionally. Cool? We're on the same page? Yes? All right. First, let's write down this diagram. Okay, so write a line with 2 arrows. Okay, the first arrow is what? Nope. Remember, suffering's on top of pain. Okay, so pain's number 1. Pain's the initial experience. The second arrow is suffering. That's when we dwell, ruminate, wish, want on what happened. Right, so Addie, we could use your example from a couple weeks ago when you got injured. I'm sure that was super, super stressful experience with everything else going on with club volleyball, right? So the initial experience of that pain, or the mental pain of accepting that you can't do anything about it, right, that's the pain, okay? But if you continue to think about it week after week after week and how it could have been different, or why me, which is what a lot of us go into, that's suffering. Does that make sense? We're all on the same page? Yes? Okay, now, we're going to talk about, girls and boys, flow again, okay? Flow has to relate to being like what? Water. You were gone for that again. Can someone help explain what being like water is?
Be like water.
If I punch water a bunch of times, yes. If I punch water a bunch of times, what?
Accept challenges.
Saying yes to it, forming with the obstacle, right? Saying yes to what you're experiencing, okay? That's learning how to flow with something. Eyes and ears, okay? So, when we talk about flowing with emotions, most people do not do this. Like we learned, they label things as good or bad, so they either cling to something they want or deny something that they don't want, okay? This is called resistance. Have you heard of resistance before in psychology? That's okay. So what is resistance? Resistance band. So does it make it harder on something than it would be without the resistance? Yes. Resistance is in your control. You just have to stop doing it. You have to give it up. So what this would look like, girls and boys, let's say these 2 circles represent the same emotion, okay? And there's 2 different ways of handling this emotion. So let's say that we're upset because we had a really, really big game in volleyball and we played like crap, okay? The emotional experience, the pain initially is going to be we're upset, right? We're down on ourselves because we want to be better and we didn't perform like we think we're capable of. The initial experience, can you control that? No, okay? But what you can control, boys and girls, is learning how to flow with the emotion. So saying yes to it essentially, letting it run its course, not denying it. Because if I sit there and deny the emotion, tell myself to not be upset about it or to feel a different way, that's causing resistance. So this line, girls, represents resistance. When we resist something, it creates a block in the mind or within feeling, okay? If I don't have resistance and I have water pass through me, or whatever this emotional feeling is, so these lines, girls, represents feeling or some sort of energy inside of us, okay? If we let it pass freely, will it run its course naturally in a quick manner? Yes or no? It will, because is there anything stopping it from flowing freely through you? Addie, is there anything stopping it? No. Okay, eyes and ears. When I resist the emotion, when I say no to it, when I wish it to be different, okay, it's creating a block, correct? So when this energy tries to pass through us, what happens? It gets stuck. And does it take a long time for this energy to eventually pass through us? Yes. So that's why, let's say we're in an emotional rut, okay? We've been really, really sad for 1 to 2 months, which is a very long time to feel that emotion, okay? What's happening here is when we go through our highs and lows in life, or our game, emotionally, okay? When we get stuck in the emotions we don't want, what is going on with the energy that's trying to pass through us? Are we resisting it?
Yeah.
So does it take longer to pass? Yes. So that's where we get stuck in these ruts or these highs instead of it looking like this. Okay? If it's a roller coaster up and down, all right, we're not saying you're giving into those emotions. We're saying you're feeling them fully, right? So if it's passing through you fully, are you getting stuck in any of the states, essentially? If you're letting it flow, are you getting stuck? No. Do I want you to get stuck? Because it's getting stuck, self-inflicted. Yes. Make sense? So now let's go back to this graph. Okay? Let's talk about whenever I draw a circle, boys and girls, the circle represents what is. What does that mean? What is? Think of the butterfly we drew in class 3, right? You have judgment and non-judgment, correct? When we don't judge something, it is what? What is. That's what is means, right? It's what is happening. I'm not putting my take on it. I'm not saying I like it. I'm not saying I dislike it. It's what is. Does that make sense? Now, most of us, when what is happening, do we want it to be different? Right? We're experiencing an emotion that's bad. We shouldn't feel it, right? We want it to be different. So this creates what? Does it create that line of wanting? Wanting leads to what? Attachment, okay? Now, we have this attachment of a certain way I'm supposed to feel, Paige, okay? Let's say, Paige, that you're feeling something that you don't want to feel, okay? You're resisting it. You're avoiding it at all costs. You're trying to convince yourself that I don't feel this way, even when I do. I hang out with my friends to avoid my feelings. A lot of people do that. Or they do something else to try and escape it, okay? What's going to happen if you try and let this energy pass through you if you're resisting it? Will it ever pass through you? No, okay? A lot of people, they try to avoid it, like I said, suppress it or escape it. Let's say you try and let go, Paige, of this emotion that you haven't let pass through you yet, okay? It still has air in it, and we're underwater right now, okay? So what's going to happen if I let go of it and it still has air in it? What happens? It's not going to let go. What is it going to do? It's going to come back. What happens when you push a beach ball underwater? Well, yeah, if I push it farther and farther down, does that mean it's going to explode higher and higher and higher? The emotions will always come back unless you work with them and work through them, right? Doesn't matter if you try and avoid them. It doesn't matter if you try and resist them. They'll always come back. Where if you learn to let it happen, you accept it, let it run its course, try and show you what it has to show you, right? That would be an example of letting go of something that's been fully filled or fully flown through. When I let go of that, where's it going to go? Will it sink to the bottom? Yes. If it's not full of air, if it's heavy, yes, right? And will it ever come back? Will you ever have to work through that exact scenario again? Yes or no? No, you wouldn't have to. Does that make sense? So I just rambled on a lot, but essentially, when we resist something, it does what? It comes back. It persists. So write this down. Resistance persists. So when I say that, we're going to get into it, but emotion distorts perception, am I trying to say we have to learn how to be less emotional? That's not what I'm saying, right? Bingo. What am I trying to say? Before we can let it go, though, what do we have to do? Fully feel it, right? Accept it. Fully experience what you're experiencing, right? Because if I'm resisting it, are you fully experiencing that emotion? No, right? Because if I can fully experience the emotion and still be the person I'm supposed to be, do I have a lot of power? And say, I do. Does that make sense? So write this down. Before you can fully let go of something, you have to fully experience it. And if I resist something, that is not fully experiencing. I'm not saying to be less emotional. I'm actually saying to be more emotional in the sense of fully feeling it and not denying it. Does that make sense, boys and girls? Do we get how this is kind of can connect to some real life situations so far? Yes? Okay. All right. Now, we're going to talk about emotions and distortion of perception now. Okay, so again, we learned that the photo booth, like when my face becomes a swirl, obviously my perception of me is distorted, correct? Yes? The goal of all this meditation and mindfulness stuff is to see what? To see clearly, right? right? So it's just like the room analogy page. When the lights are off and you can't see what's going on inside the room of the mind, can you see the problems that you're experiencing? No. Can you fix them then? So let's say you turn the lights half on, you can kind of see, you kind of can't see. Is that better than having the lights off? Yes. But the more clearly we can see, to the point where it's full clarity, you'll be able to make the best decisions and choices to be who you want to be. And you'll have the most amount of power and control over what you can. Does that make sense? So what we're going to do is we're going to draw a graph. Okay? The horizontal line represents time. This middle line is the present moment. The line ahead is the future. And the line behind is the past. Okay? The vertical line represents emotion. Whoopsies. Okay? The bottom, I'm putting in quotes, represents the bad emotions, and the top represents the good emotions. But like we've learned, are there good and bad emotions? No, they're all the same. They're all pointing to something. Make sense? So, let's take the present moment. Does anybody want to give a real-life example of an emotion they experienced for longer than normal over the last week? Can be any emotion. Boredom? Tiredness? Okay. I would consider that a state of physical. But you can be tired mentally too, like mental exhaustion. Let's think of a different one. What'd you say? Drained? That's the same thing as tired. You're good. It can be anything, right? You have happy, sad, angry, jealous. There's lots of them. Nobody's got any of them, right? Nobody wants to give an example? Okay, let's give we can use an example for me. This didn't happen to me because I let the emotion pass through me, but this morning I had to go to the ER, okay? I had to miss my first session because I tried to push a door open and a bunch of glass shattered all over my hands. That upsets me because I couldn't be there for the first session, right? But is there anything I could do about the situation? No. But let's say I didn't handle it that way. Let's say I got stuck in the way my morning could have been if I didn't smash the door open and cut my hands open, right? I'm in a bad mood, so let's just say I'm angry, okay? When I'm in an emotional state, everything I perceive is going to be distorted. So this means when you think about the future, you're going to see it from more of an emotional lens than in terms of the one you're in the present moment right now. When you think about the past and recall objective events you experienced, you will see them as worse or better than they actually were, okay? And that also means what you see in the present moment will be worse or better than it actually is, depending on your emotional state. Does this make sense? So someone give me an objectively happy memory. Anyone. Can be anything. So did you guys go to the fair? Did you guys have a good time at the fair? Who had someone say they had a good time at the fair. Anybody? Okay, Lily had a great time at the fair. So when Lily experienced this emotion and this experience, objectively it was good. In the moment it was good. That means that's what it was true when it happened. Let's say Lily isn't as good of a mood now, right? When she recalls that exact same memory, in our psychology, we will see it as worse than it actually was, even though we're thinking about the same event that happened. Does that make sense? Let's say I think about something in the future, okay? And before, when I used to think about, who wants to give an example of something they think about in the future and it absolutely excites the crap out of them? Can be anything. Winning the lottery? Okay, so let's say winning the lottery, right? When I'm in a neutral state or my balanced mood, okay, when I think about winning the lottery, it feels really good. It's really exciting, okay? Let's say I'm not in a good mood and I recall that exact same imaginary event of what could happen. What's going to happen? Will you perceive it as not as good as it was when you normally do? Yes. Does that make sense? This, kids, is called projection. Write that down, projection. What is projection? Does anybody want to guess what projection is? No one does? Close. So yeah, so there's this really interesting law of human nature. When we feel something, what do we want the person next to us to feel? The same, right? We feel bad, we want the other person to feel bad. We feel good, we want the other person to feel good, okay? This is an example of our emotions projecting on to what we see, whether it's other people in the moment or we recall past events. We project that emotion onto what we're seeing. Does that make sense? If we're projecting, girls and boys, okay, are we ever seeing clearly? No. No. That means you're always seeing a distorted view of reality, of what's real and what's true. Addie, does that make sense? Have you ever seen The Matrix, kids? No. No one has? That's okay. Okay. Well, then I won't use that analogy. The other kids knew what The Matrix was. But essentially, if we're always projecting, which is what most people do if they don't learn how to meditate or be mindful, okay, is everyone kind of in a semi-dream world? Yeah. They are. They're in this distorted view of reality constantly because they don't know that their emotions are controlling what they see. Isn't that crazy? So if I'm always in this distorted view of what happens, this projected kind of semi-dream world of what's going on, say I have these successes or imaginations or strivings, and it's in the dream world, are you really getting anywhere? No. You're running in circles. Is that what most people do? That's why a complete gold mine to being essentially growing faster than other people and advancing faster is realizing that everyone's playing in that projected world of their emotions. So being careful when you're in that emotional state to not project onto it, to trying to see it as clearly and objectively as you can will advance you much farther than everyone else. Does that make sense, Lily? Mm-hmm. What did I just say? Well. Lily? What did I just say?
You said about like projecting about around other people and stuff, and like it's like not like reality kind of.
Okay, that actually is semi what I said. But essentially, we have to be really, really careful. Does that make sense? And it's not that living in the dream world's bad. It's just if you really, really want to be the best that you can be, you can't live in it. Does that make sense? Do we all kind of get that? Is it interesting? No? Do you guys start to see how you can apply this, though, in real life? Yeah. That's why it's just super, super helpful to learn what mindfulness is so you don't get caught in a lot of the same traps that other people get caught in. Cool? 11:31. All right, let's see how much more time I have. Okay. All right, first, did everybody write this down, this graph? Yeah, write down the graph to what makes sense to you. So when you go back and look at this, are we good over here, boys? We get it? Let's do, has everyone got that graph written down? Okay, let's use one more example. Let's say in our sport, right? This is the problem with confidence, right? If you tell yourself you're not confident, right, are you in the projected world? Yes. You are, right? Because you're in some state of you're upset or you're unhappy or you're sad because you feel you're not as good as you normally are, correct? So obviously when you recall all the stuff about you and your game, are you going to see it as worse than it is? Yes. So saying you're unconfident doesn't necessarily mean that you're not confident. You're defining yourself by the projected state of emotion. Does that make sense? So just by understanding this, does that give you a whole lot more confidence? It should, because should you get caught in the same trap that you normally do when you're not confident or you feel like you're not good? You shouldn't. It'll take time to practice, but even understanding this can help you not get caught. Cool? Okay. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about today, boys and girls, is thoughts versus thinking. Okay? So, obviously we know that thoughts and thinking are very tied to feeling. We learned that in class 1. How are thinking and thoughts related to feeling something? If I feel something, normally it causes what? So we'll use one of my, did you kids ever see like how I used to wear that glucose monitor? No one ever saw that? Okay, that's fine. So I wear a glucose monitor for the last 20 days to measure how my blood changes with different foods I eat, okay? So let's say you eat something sugary, okay? What happens to your glucose is it spikes, okay? When we're in a spiked state of glucose, kids, do you think I feel different than I normally do? Yeah. So and when I'm in that state of feeling of spiked glucose, I'm more hungry, right? So when I feel this hunger, what do you think I'm going to spawn more of? Thoughts of food, right? So feeling and thoughts have a direct correlation. When we think of something, does that cause a feeling? Yes. When I feel something, does that cause a thought? So are they very interlinked? Very. So Paige, what example did I just use to demonstrate how thoughts and feeling are connected? When I'm hungry, right? Yep. I have more what? Thoughts about food. Perfect. So our thoughts and feeling are very connected. We get that? Okay. Now, thoughts versus thinking. They're two very, very different things. Does anyone know the difference? What's the difference? They're very different. They're not. And I'm here to tell you why they're different. It's okay. Does anybody want to guess, or do we need me to hear explain it, Carter? What are you doing? Eyes and ears, kids. We're almost there. 10 more minutes. Come on. Okay? So, thoughts versus thinking. Listen. Pain is the what experience? Initial, right? So thoughts, right, are when we meditate, right? I sit down and I try and focus on my breath and I get lost. What had to start that getting lost? Not thinking. Thought popped in your head, correct? So a thought appeared in my mind. And is that going to happen? Can you control thoughts just randomly appearing? No, that's why they're so random and miscellaneous. They're all over the place because they just appear in our consciousness. Does that make sense? So thought is the initial appearance of a thought. What's thinking? Thinking about the thought. Bingo. So write that down, right? Thinking is when we put thoughts on thoughts, right? When we think about the initial thought, that's what thinking is. Right? So if this bubble represents the first thought you have, girls, all of these will be linked to further thoughts, right? So if I get lost in some imaginary scenario of this beautiful restaurant I want to create one day, it's very possible that it likely stemmed from what thought appearing in our consciousness? Probably something about food. And then he went down this rabbit hole of all these things and how you're going to become this awesome chef. It's just a random example, okay? But all of this is what? What is what I just circled? What part of, which definition is that? Thinking. That's what thinking is, right? When you put thoughts on thoughts. Can you control thoughts? No. Can you control thinking? Yeah. You sure can, okay? Is thinking what causes us all of our suffering? Yes. It is, okay? So write this down. I can't control thoughts, but I can control thinking. And like I just said, where does all our suffering come from? Thinking. Because is it a second arrow to an experience? Yes. So I'm going to make a really, really bold statement, but we have to remember the definition. I want you to give up what? Thinking. I want you to give up thinking. Does that mean you're going to stop having thoughts? No. Never, right? So really, really good ideas, girls and boys, are still going to appear to you. You're still going to be able to function, to do everything you need to do. You don't need to have all the extra layers on top of those initial thoughts. Does that make sense? There are times where you have to sit deliberately, like if you're confused or trying to understand something, intentionally you can say, all right, I want to turn my thinking brain on today. But unless you're doing it intentionally, should you give it up? Thinking. Unless you're doing it intentionally. You should give up thinking. That doesn't mean we're giving up thoughts. Do we get the difference? Yes? So if let's say this circle is the sky, and clouds represent what? Clouds represent thoughts. What does a thunderstorm represent? Thinking. Because we add this huge layer mess of what we think about the experience we're having. Do we get that? Can you prevent the thunderstorms mentally? Most of the time you can. Does that make sense? By how you react to what you experience. We're on that same page? We get that? Yes? Okay. Cool. All right. We got 5 minutes and we're going to practice. So, how many minutes is everybody at? What did you say?
Is it 11?
Are you? Well, everyone's at different things because everyone's showing up to different classes. So everyone say what are you guys at? How many minutes?
10.
You're at 7? So everyone's adding a minute again. Okay? To whatever you had previously. Everyone's got a different amount. Okay? But listen, you're not going to really get any better if you don't challenge yourself. It's like the weight room. You're wasting money with me and Brad if you don't advance what you've been learning. Does that make sense? The same exact concept. So we're going to go back to the in-out meditation, but now I really want you to focus on a lot of the things we learned about with thinking and thoughts too. When we have that initial thought or we get lost, watch the causes and links between feelings and thoughts. Notice when you think of something, how it makes you feel, or when you feel something, what thoughts come about. So really try and pay attention to how emotionally it ties with thinking and what we get lost in. Does that make sense? It's designed, I get it, it's boring, it's simple, it doesn't seem like it'd help, but I promise you it's turning your mindfulness on. If you notice you're lost, you come back. Notice you're lost, you come back. But pay attention and observe how we get lost and how we come back. Notice the whole process. Does that make sense? Okay, take a few deep breaths, take it seriously. Okay? We're going to go for 5 minutes. Cool? So that means if you have 7, Johnny, or 8 now? You have 8 now? Okay, you got 3 minutes left. Cool? We're all on the same page? Yeah. All right, get into your meditation positions. We're not on the backrest. If you want to challenge yourself, what's a way we can challenge ourselves? We don't use the in and out cues. So if you haven't done it, if you weren't here the last month, use the in and out cues. But if you've been doing it the whole 9 weeks that you've been with me, if you want to challenge yourself, just focus on the feeling of the breath. You don't have to cue it. But it'll get a lot harder then. Does that make sense? Yes? We're all on the same page. Okay. On your marks. Get set. Go.